Hello, my name is Jim Capretta. I'm a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's session on improving government performance, an insider's view of what it will take. That's how we advertised it, which I think was quite accurate. Um, I'm joined today by Daniel Werfel, who was the commissioner from 2023 to 2025 of the Internal Revenue Service and had a long and distinguished public service career prior to that appointment. So we're very grateful for him agreeing to come and join us today for this conversation about a very important topic that's near and dear to his heart and mine as well, which is how to improve government performance, which is always a challenge and something that never ends. With this background he has had, both in public and private sector, he's obviously well qualified to get into this topic with us, and so we're grateful for him joining us. The current administration contends that it is interested in improving government performance, but to date there is mostly evidence of pretty strong reductions across the board that may not be guided by an overall management philosophy. The long-term effects of that are open to question, and we'll talk about that as we get into this conversation today. But whatever's gone on with that, that does not mean all was well before this administration took office either. Improving performance in the public sector has always been challenging for many reasons, and sometimes it hasn't really been a top priority, although maybe sometimes it's, kind of up and down depending on the leadership at the moment. Many federal agencies today are operating with IT systems that really date back 3 and 4 decades, which is kind of incredible when you think about it, and need to be updated, as well as their business operations that flow from that IT architecture. We want to explore all of that today with someone who's kind of been doing this both in a central management role at OMB and then also leading a very important and big agency. Mr. Werfel, Commissioner Werfel, has had more than 20 years of combined federal service. He's, as I mentioned, he was commissioner recently, 2023 to 2025, but he also served in an acting capacity in the same position during the latter part or during the second term of the Obama administration. Prior to that, he also served as controller and acting deputy director at the Office of Management and Budget, and it was my pleasure that our tenures crossed for a time at OMB in the early 2000s. He's also served as global leader of public service practices in the Boston Consulting Group. He has a master's in public policy from Duke, another thing we share in common, a JD from the University of North Carolina, and a bachelor's degree from Cornell. He received the Presidential Rank Award in 2008 and served on the Defense Business Board from 2014 to 2016. Those are just a few of the highlights of a pretty long and distinguished career. So Commissioner Werfel, thank you for joining us. It's great to have you with AEI for this session today.
That's good to be here, Jim. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Well, let's jump right into it. You just not too long ago left your position at the IRS. So let's start with that because it was obviously a big and important job. This is an agency with 90,000 employees. I think sometimes people outside of government lose track of the scale of what's going on in government. And it has an $18 billion administrative budget. Got it substantially bigger during your tenure for a variety of reasons that I'm sure we'll talk about. So does a substantial management challenge when you're placed at the top of such a thing that, of course, will exist after you leave and existed before you arrive. So it's a temporary period, but you do your best, as all the commissioners who have come in before you have said as well. So what was your approach? You get asked to do this, you say yes to it, it's a very big job. What was your approach to leading it? How did you work with your senior personnel to kind of motivate them and everyone else below them to kind of do more with less as best you could?
Well, Jim, I would point to, maybe I'll put things in 3 buckets in terms of kind of how I prioritize. First, I felt like we needed a simple to understand vision for where we were going. When I arrived at the IRS, the Inflation Reduction Act had recently been enacted. There was all this new money, which was intended to modernize the IRS, to take it from being an agency that was built on 1960s technology and to really change it. And in fact, because of COVID and other factors, the tax filing season before I arrived was one of the worst in IRS history. Record low customer service metrics, stagnant website technology. The taxpayers were not finding new tools to make the process of filing your taxes easier. Anemic audit rates at every level. And so in comes the Inflation Reduction Act money and this big opportunity. And when I arrived, the team handed me a draft 200-page plan for how they were going to spend the money, and it was planned to be published. And there wasn't a lot of time to edit it, so we published it, but I immediately reflected that it needed a simpler kind of elevator speech. We needed to get both internal and external alignment, not on 200 pages of these work streams, these KPIs, these critical milestones, all of which were essential. The plan was excellent at setting up an internal program management office for how you do it. But how do you tell your aunt or uncle exactly what the IRS is going to do with the money? So part one was, can I fashion a simple vision? And that vision was essentially as follows, was that all taxpayers should be able to do all interactions with the IRS digitally or virtually if they choose. And that just is not and was not an option. You can go to your online banking tool and do just about everything without calling them, without going into a bricks and mortar bank. Jim, if you, for whatever reason, want to go see your January 2023 bank statement, it's a few clicks away. Not true in terms of how you navigate the IRS. And so we wanted to give a nonpartisan view of, let's modernize in a way that's helpful to you, and let's make it like as good as your best online banking solution, except it's for your taxes. And so I tried to explain how each of those building blocks of projects we were working on, I always try to tether it to that vision of the best online banking tools in the world. We wanted that for the IRS. Now that left out enforcement. So there are some challenges in terms of trying to synthesize a single visionary statement, but I thought it was important to anchor our vision on customer service and on modernization in that way. So that was part one. Part two was aligning with the Secretary of the Treasury, making sure that I knew exactly what she was holding me accountable for. What are the 4 or 5 outcomes I would ask her to make sure that I knew I had to optimize for? I love this analogy that someone once taught me about it's called the backpack analogy, Jim. And it's like you're planning a big trip to go into the woods, and you've got all of the stuff you're going to need, but you can't fit it all. It's laid out on the table in front of you, and you have to figure out how you're going to pack your backpack. And lo and behold, one of the things you need to pack is a CPAP machine, right? And you got to have that, right? Because you can't risk it. So that goes in first. So you're optimizing. So now you're fitting the rain slicker and the granola bars in and around the CPAP machine, but that's what you optimize for. And so I would basically ask Janet Yellen, what am I optimizing for? What are the 4 or 5 things that are the most important to deliver? I really wanted to make sure I had that line of sight to make resource trade-offs and decisions. And the third was making sure that I had the right governing philosophy with the IRS bureaucracy. And what I told the leaders, and I said it in town hall meetings, and I said it with every layer of management, I basically fashioned myself more as an incremental leader, that we're going to do things by building blocks versus kind of turn the car hard to the right or hard to the left. And the way I describe that, Jim, is I would say to the team, again, town hall meetings or one-on-ones, I would say that coming into this position with all the experience I have from government and living through transformations and changes, what I've learned is that there are three parts of the portfolio for a leader of a large public operation. The first is get out of the way, right? There's no added value you're going to have in getting your fingers dirty. The trajectory of the agency is fine without you getting involved. So get out of the way. The second is the nudge, right? I like where you're going, but I want it to be 20% more bold or 10% quicker. But it's just like, we're going to reset it, but we're not going to change everything. And the third is break glass. And what I told the IRS to try to kind of make sure that they didn't feel this overwhelming weight of this large transformation, I said, my biggest part of my portfolio is I'm going to get out of the way. I'm not going to quibble with the momentum and the direction and the framing you have for the various initiatives. And then that'll be the biggest. And then the middle size will be the nudge. And there'll be areas where I'm going to ask you to reset by 10 or 20 degrees what we're doing. And then I'm going to reserve in very limited circumstances, but important ones, where I'm going to ask for a completely different approach, where we're going to rip the motherboard out and start over again or do things completely differently. And so I tried to set the tone with the bureaucracy and with the leaders, that they were entering a safe space of transformation where I would be transparent about this portfolio, and that they shouldn't feel like they needed to dig in and wait me out, shouldn't fear the change, because only in those break glass moments would we make major change, and they would have a heads up and we would collectively decide where we needed to break glass.
Those are really excellent points. I'm going to come back to, I want to talk about Doge in 1 second. We talked ahead of time, and we know it needs to come up, but I want to follow up on just one point you just made, just to kind of make sure I drill down on, which is to get that next level. Okay, so you're dealing with mostly career staff when you come into the kind of job you're in. It's a big place, lots of institutional memory and history, a lot of devotion to the agency, as there always is in these federal agencies. People are very public spirited about what they're doing. But you are the leader of it, and my experience, and yours I think as well, is probably you do need to set some accountability for the people working in an agency, and performance metrics. Was that done below your level, or did you get involved in, for your senior leadership team, trying to set, how did you motivate them? Was it
Yeah.
performance metrics? Was it bonuses? Was it just, attaboy kind of stuff? How did you go about really trying to hold people accountable to do better?
There's a couple of dimensions to it, Jim. You start with kind of getting a collective understanding of where our performance gaps were and weren't. I think you want to make sure that there's alignment. Not everything is broken, right? And it comes back to my biggest bucket being, I'm going to get out of the way. I didn't want there to be a reflection that because there's a new leader, I'm going to assume that everything you were doing was wrong. And the reality is, and I think this is true in a lot of large government operations, a lot goes right. It's just never reported, right? You only kind of take a pause or see the congressional hearing blow up, or the cover story in the Washington Post when something goes wrong. But 100 times, 1,000 times in a row, like, the person did get their refund check on time and had a fluid process in filing, and the audit did uncover tax evasion. We selected the right one for audit, and we got the money back for the taxpayer. So that happens often. And so it's motivating and empowering for people to be part of the discussion of, okay, where do we want to improve? We have funding for the first time in a generation. I would often motivate people by saying, there's a future 50 years from now. The IRS people are sitting in this room 50 years from now are going to look back at 2023 and say, wow, the IRS got tens of billions of dollars from the Inflation Reduction Act. What did they do in that moment? Did they squander it, or did they set the trajectory forward? And we're now benefiting 50 years later. And so there was a real sense at the IRS, and it wasn't just me, it was kind of a um, awareness that we did have a bad filing season, that things weren't trending right. But I was open to this idea that not everything's broken, and let's collectively figure out where the performance metrics are or the performance gaps are. And then, like, there was no rocket science. We set up a PMO. I hired a very good chief transformation officer named David Pedrino to come in and run the PMO. And it was like any high functioning transformation. You had work streams and accountable owners and red, yellow, green scorecards, and the details of it and the success really relied on, are we having honest discussions? Have we really identified where the red is versus the yellow versus the green, or are we looking at everything through the wrong lens? When we identify an issue, are we solutioning it, or are we letting bureaucracy and inertia take over? And just like with any large scale transformation, I saw a mix of everything. There were moments where we had perfect line of sight that this is red, yellow, or green, and we had the right intervention strategy. And then we had areas where we were truly red, but we thought we were green. And areas where we were red, knew we were red, but we couldn't get our act together on the intervention to change it. And so working as honestly and transparently in this PMO structure as we could, I tried to increase where we were having honest alignment and the right interventions. And then I'll go back to the conversations that I had with Janet Yellen and Wally Adeyemo, the deputy, where I made sure and I went the extra mile to ask the 10 right questions to the 10 right people on the 4 or 5 things that I was optimizing for, because I only have so much bandwidth, right? And so I really did my due diligence, at least I tried, to make sure that in the areas that I was being more held accountable by my leadership and what the administration expected of the IRS with these funds, that I really wasn't having an issue of false positive, that a green was really red and I didn't know it.
Excellent. Thank you. I neglected at the top to mention to the audience that if you have questions that you'd like me to ask late in the program, right before we adjourn, I will have an opportunity to ask Danny a couple of audience questions that are submitted. We'll screen them through Jack Rowing, our assistant, and you can send them to jack.rowing, R-O-W-I-N-G, at aei.org. And we can kind of go through those and see if there are 1 or 2 that might be good for Danny to address near the end of the program. All right, but back to our questions here. Doge. You and I both worked in government service for a time, and I think my initial reaction to Doge might have been somewhat similar to yours, which was, gee, I didn't know they could do that.
Yeah.
Which is, and maybe they couldn't. That's another to be answered question. But how did you? I mean, it's been quite a ride, and it's sort of dissipated a little bit, at least in terms of its media impact in recent months since Elon Musk left the scene. But how do you view it as
Yeah,
an ongoing enterprise? And I might say a word or two about how I view it
I would
after
love
I hear
that.
from you.
Yeah, well, I'll go back to my earlier point. First of all, I have a philosophy. I share it as well with my leaders, and I also, with any organization that I'm involved in, I don't have the monopoly on the right answer. I've grown up in both the public and the private sector with different lessons, sometimes swinging and missing, sometimes swinging and connecting, sometimes watching others fail or succeed, and have accumulated a set of instincts and philosophies for how to lead. And that led to my conclusion that running a large bureaucracy requires your biggest bucket to be get out of the way and your smallest bucket to be break less. But that's not the Doge philosophy. The Doge philosophy is the big bucket. In some ways, it sometimes felt like the only bucket was break glass. And I'm kind of fascinated to understand how you make that work. And I marveled at how quickly Doge moved in the steps they took in breaking that glass. I used to say when I do break glass, sometimes you have to kick the door in, even if there's resistance, stakeholder entrenchment. winners and losers, and so those winners and losers dynamics slow things down. Well, with Doge, they kicked a lot of doors in, and I want to understand um, how they did it, what the implications of doing it are, and what I've seen as an external viewer is that there's a lot of risks with moving that quickly and at that scale. We kept on. It felt like a repetitive process where it's like you'd hear like, well, they fired too many people, so now they're asking them back, right? Or they took a step that a court has issued a temporary restraining order on. So there was this real kind of do everything, and we'll either fix it at the back end or adjust it if it turns out we bent the rules too far. But in the meantime, while that method is undertaken, what damage is done? What are the risks, and is it worth it? Just looking at it as a balance sheet. You have the pros of significant movement, change happening quickly. I'm sure targets being hit effectively in some cases. And then on the cons, you have these mistakes, these disruptions, these potential deterioration in government operations and effectiveness. And so I really feel like we need to do a post-mortem and better understand, because it would be a shame to lose all of the benefits of that speed and the public feeling like the government, the gears of government don't need to grind slowly. Look how quickly the Doge moved. Okay, well, maybe the government can move that quickly, or can move quicker than it has historically. But can you then balance that with different types of controls and checks and balances that would mitigate some of the damage that is being done? I worry, for example, Jim, that in the haste of the movement and in the global philosophy of break glass in all sectors, that you damage employee morale currently. You lose a lot of talent from the federal government, both purposefully and inadvertently. And then you limit the appeal of public service in the federal space to incoming talented people. And that has a cost. Whether you believe in big government or small government, you want it to work, right? You want the air traffic controllers to be high quality, well-trained, capable people. Same with the food safety inspectors and whatnot. So this idea that we can afford a talent drain that may be generational, I think is a mistake. And I think we need to look at in the postmortem of Doge and how to do it better next time. How do we set a permission structure for people to come back into government, or to see the government as a great landing spot to bring their talents?
I very much agree with all your comments. I mean, I just add a couple of things, and then we'll get back to you and your your insights on all these questions. But my concern mainly is that it's disconnected from any evidence base that can be evaluated yet. And secondly, that there's a spirit about it that is clearly change the facts on the ground, and then we'll clean up the mess later. And part of it legally, that there's an aspect to this. When I began by bringing this up, I said, can they do that? And of course, my instinct mostly is they can't in many of these cases, because it requires some cooperation from the Congress that makes appropriations for these agencies at levels that seem to be being violated right now, kind of in a very indiscriminate way. And so once that gets settled out, it's not at all clear to me that the perceptions of what was done will be the same, because in our system, whether we like it or not, and I basically mostly like it, Congress does decide what the appropriation is going to be for most of these agencies, and then you have to work with that. So,
yeah, one additional Doge comment, I think, to tie a bow on it is, look, I testified before a House committee during the heart of Doge. So I was no longer the commissioner. I was now a private citizen, but I was invited to testify along with other former commissioners to talk about what was happening at the IRS under Doge. And I made the following point. I said, the challenge I think we have is that there's no plan to react to, right? So they're riffing these people, they're firing these probationary employees, they're submitting budgets that cut the technology budget. And what do you make of all this? And I said, well, it would be helpful if I saw the plan, right? The budget that was released, in particular the skinny budget, basically says we're going to replace these workers that we're terminating with AI and technology solutions. It's like, okay, where? Which ones come first? What are the functionalities that make the most sense to deploy AI now and where you can effectively serve taxpayers? There was no plan. And I told the committee, when I got confirmed as the IRS commissioner in 2023, and we produced our plan, our 200 plus page plan, that the big criticism, in particular from the Republicans on the Hill, was it wasn't detailed enough. They said we read this plan and we still don't exactly know what you're planning. And I welcome that feedback. I was like, okay, let's add more details. What are the questions that, after reading this plan, what gaps do you have in the horizon of what we're doing? And I will happily and readily close those gaps for you as best as I could. Here with the Doge actions at the IRS, there's no plan. I can't tell you right now what their priorities are for what functions they're going to modernize first. It hasn't come together in a strategic plan, and that's why it's very difficult to evaluate in a given moment. And the last thing I'll say, Jim, is like, I want to be cautious anytime I talk about the Doge, is to not indicate that I'm trying to defend the status quo. There is plenty of reform that's necessary, both at the IRS and across government. And I'm the last person who says, oh, let's go back to the way it was January 19th, 2025, and just stick with that. No, there's a lot to improve and a lot to modernize. I think the question that we should be asking is the method that the Doge took, as you mentioned, chaotic, as I mentioned, not connected to a broader plan, specifically at the IRS, done in a way that I think will damage morale and create challenges for bringing talent back into government. How do we learn from that and reset a future version of Doge that starts to kind of regress towards something that's still aggressive and bold and breaks glass where needed, but does so in a way that has better balance?
I completely agree with your perspective. I do very much. I think it was well said. All right, let's get back into some of these other matters. And here's related to the Doge, I guess, but complicated question, one that when you had to deal with it at the IRS and also probably in your previous positions, which is this contradiction at the heart of performance improvement. I mean, when you came into the IRS, it had already, in a sense, been done. There was this, the IRA had put in this investment money and so on for the modernization, which of course now is subject to change and all that. But for many agencies, they're always saying the same thing, which is, hey, if we could just get a capital investment budget that we could work with to, invest in better systems, better IT, more modernization of how we go about interacting with the public and doing our jobs, we could improve performance and hit better metrics over time. But it takes an investment first. There's a little bit of capital
Yeah.
involved up front. In our public budgeting systems, set aside your experience with the IRA, in most agencies, there is no difference between your capital budget and your operating budget. You go to the Congress and you have one budget and you try to squeeze in capital and what they're willing to do each year in the appropriations process. And many agencies of over many years have always said that's a big impediment, I know there's lots of ideas here and there over the years about what to do about it. But how do you think about that, not just in your IRS experience, but even prior to that at OMB and elsewhere? can we, is there a way to meld some kind of capital investment strategy with later returns to the
Yeah.
taxpayers
I
that they
think though,
can then,
look, my reflection, well, first of all, the failures over the years at the IRS to modernize its systems and the failures at other government agencies to modernize theirs effectively, um, it's a complicated set of root causes. There's part of it is the unevenness of the budget, and that you don't have that full capital investment, that you're dealing with CRs. That's part of it. Part of it is contractors and the incentives that are set up with contractors that don't always align to, kind of a speedy select a speedy and more incremental or targeted deployment. The contractors often want to sell big, bold, long-term transformations that of their technology that don't always work well. There's skill gaps in the government in terms of an understanding of how to do large scale IT. And then there's winners and losers that tend to slow things down, and in particular at the IRS, risk aversion, right? Because the systems that exist now are effectively getting the job done. I mean, there's a lot of duct tape involved, but the tax system seems to operate each year. And if you replace it with a new system and there's some type of outage or failure or cyber exposure, you don't want to be the person who's doing it at that time. So you tend to err on the side of the legacy system. And that's probably a whole other hour we can do on that. But in general, what I think happens too often with funding is that we fund things in the emergency, right? If I told you it's going to be $70,000 a year to maintain this roof, but 7 million when it collapses, you basically either wait till it collapses or right before it collapses, right? And so what we see is if the technology is, kind of stumbling along and not about to be a mission critical failure, it's harder to garner the type of capital investment necessary to make the change. Um, and and I do think, to your point, we haven't yet perfected, or there's more work to be done, the business case. What happens a lot with these business cases for technology is you make the case and then you're never really held accountable for the benefits, right? And so there's been some creative things done where, you have these working capital funds or these franchise funds, and you have contributions that you need to make back into the fund based on the efficiencies. I think we still need to work to figure out, a better incentive structure for how federal agencies secure earlier, so that we're not waiting to the last minute for these systems to fail. And I also think, and I learned this at the IRS, Jim. I think we actually need to provide a little bit more cushion for federal agencies to run that legacy system a little bit longer, so that there is that handoff before the new technology goes live, that enables you to take a little bit more risks, knowing that the legacy system will backdrop you. I made that promise to my team when I arrived. I said I will support a longer lifeline for the legacy system to make sure that you can go to sleep at night as we're flipping things over to the new system. And that's just and look, a Doge person or someone might come in and say, why not just kick in the door and tell them you're just going to have to live with the extra stress? These are different leadership styles. I always felt like it was important to keep and retain my tech team, and to grow it, and to have that type of collaboration.
yeah, and also I would just add to that failure in a private enterprise is quite a different proposition than failure in a public service enterprise, right? Which is, you know, you're doing something to serve the public, And if something goes wrong, it's in a private company, it's a hit to the profits and the shareholders, and the company has a limited blast radius for it, right? And something goes wrong in some of these public agencies that are serving important public functions. The potential blast radius is pretty indiscriminate. So you got to be careful. And I think there's a certain prudence to being careful in those kind of jobs. Not to say I'm defending legacy systems. Don't get me wrong,
Yeah,
but
Jim, but let me give a good example on the contractor incentive, because I think this is something that, that the Doge saw too and rightfully criticized. But so what slows the IRS down is millions and millions and millions of lines of code that were written in an old COBOL language. And now you have to translate it into a modern language, right? And you got to go line by line to do it. Okay. Um, and it's like DNA. One strand of the code is wrong, and then you got a big problem on your hands. You could have an outage, you could have a chronic mistake of people getting the wrong credits, getting underpaid, whatever. It's messy. And so you might say, huh, really? Do you really have to go line by line through? It's taking you all these years. Can't we deploy AI and do it like in an hour, right? Can't we use a supercomputer? And the reality is maybe, but the vendors that are coming in and the smart people that are coming in to help the IRS think creatively, they're actually not incentivized to like create the quick and easy. It's like there's a lot of companies that get wealthy off of this line by line review. So there does need to be kind of a break glass moment there in terms of to rechange the incentive structure so that you're not stuck. It may be, Jim, that there is no way to do it other than the line by line. Or there may be that using AI and supercomputing, you could actually rewrite the code safely, much more quickly, and be done with it. The reality is that I did not see when I was there a clear the runway clear for landing on doing something aggressive like that.
yeah,
And so that's where some of the struggles are.
yeah, got it. Um, that naturally leads into something we wanted to talk about, which is, of course, you were leading the federal agency during this fever pitch around AI. And do people did the people in the IRS team come to you and say, boy, oh boy, this has got great potential for us? Or was it more of a question of wariness about it and just too unclear, and set it aside because no one knows where it's really going? How are people inside the government, that is in the guts of it, thinking through what are the implications of AI for their operations?
Well, I have a couple of different reactions. First, I still think that there's kind of a murkiness to what AI is and what it means and what's included in AI. Some people would walk into my office and they were doing, basic data science and say we're doing AI. And some people would say, well, it's not really AI unless it's kind of generative and doesn't become AI until it's kind of substantially replacing the work footprint. I mean, there's all these different ways of thinking about it. And so definitionally, that was a challenge. And also the art of the possible was not really well understood. And I don't think really well understood in terms of, because I could pontificate, Jim, on like a future robot that walks through the IRS and like does everything a lot better than all the employees, but how realistic is that? And so to kind of have a vision that's grounded in practicality is something that needs to occur. And then, at least for me, and this is somewhat ironic compared to what's going on with the Doge, again, when I was getting accountability from Congress on all of this, anytime AI was brought up, I was told to proceed very cautiously because AI could quickly become surveillance, or AI could quickly bleed into inherently governmental things that employees need to do, not robots. And so I always kind of felt like we needed to telegraph exactly where we were going with AI and make sure that we were actually, in some cases, going slower than our private sector counterparts, because we did not want to be first movers until we understood the implication, for example, of a bot dealing with a taxpayer issue with sensitive data or sensitive outcomes. Um, and so, so risk aversion, murkiness, but that did not lead to stagnation. And we saw opportunities, I'll call them low-hanging fruit, but important fruit, to really move forward. And I'll give you a couple of examples. One, we did make changes in our call center operations to add more smart technology to route phone calls at the front end to where they needed to go to a human versus going to a bot. And then built up the bot technology to handle more types of phone calls. So we had, AI doing distribution of phone calls more efficiently, and then handling a bigger footprint of those phone calls more effectively. And the other thing that we were advancing was, I think probably everyone on this call is now um, either addicted to or dabbling with, large language models like, ChatGPT, Grok, Claude, whatever, choose your favorite, and seeing that they do unlock efficiency in how you write an email or whatever. What we started to explore was how to use that to help IRS employees deal with questions that were coming in from the public. So, as an example, in the traditional way, you might do a Google search. You might ask Google, when is the tax filing deadline? And then Google will give you references. They'll give you documents and different links to click on. Well, now Google, through their Gemini tool, will say, if you ask it, if it's good, will say, the filing deadline is April 15th, unless you live in Maine or Massachusetts. There, your filing deadline may be shifted by Patriots Day, depending on when Patriots Day falls. Also, you should look to see if your zip code has been a part of a declared disaster area, because it may also have a 6-month delay in your filing deadline. Please go here to see if your zip code is on the list. And a 1-paragraph answer, right? Well, if you're an IRS employee behind the scenes and you get a question on the phone and you have to figure out what the Internal Revenue Manual says the right answer is, currently, traditionally, you're getting references. You're getting you IRS person need to check IRM section X, section Y, and section Z, and then quickly collaborate all of that together versus getting that large language model answer. And so we were working to put that large language model into place. So yes, AI can have an impact, but as you can see by my examples, we were moving thoughtfully and incrementally rather than basically saying, the march of the robots in to take over.
Right. Very good. All right, we're getting near our end, and I have a couple of very good questions coming in from the audience that I'll ask
Yeah,
in just a second. But before that, I have to ask about OMB, because you
yeah.
also served in senior positions at the Office of Management and Budget, which is in the current administration, again, taken on a very high-profile central role in executing on what appears to be the president's plans to do various things across the government, and very active role in this administration. It goes, there are ebbs and flows to that, as you know, having worked there, and I know. Um, how do you view the M side of OMB in this? Can OMB play a constructive role in helping the agencies in a partnership on these questions, or is it always going to be slightly adversarial and just I don't mind adversarial all that much, totally. I mean, because it's a big government, and you need to be held accountable, and so there's good to have different perspectives. But how do you view it at this point, having been served on both sides?
Well, first, I reflect that OMB, at least when I was there with you and beyond into the Obama administration, really is a remarkable structure that helps bridge the president and the White House to the broader front lines and the bureaucracy and the operations of government in a way that creates a connectivity, a back and forth communication and a dialogue, an evidence base, a coordinating mechanism. And as you mentioned in my bio, I ran BCG's global public sector practice. and through the IRS have worked in OECD environments and learned through those conversations that in many cases other governments envy or aspire to have a center of government operation similar to OMB that is well staffed with high performing employees that are dedicated to kind of balancing politics and policy in a way that provides a more coordinating function across agencies on common areas of reform, but also can go deep on a swim lane for a given agency or a given program, project, or activity. So when functioning well, and I think it did for many, many, many decades, it was never perfect. It really was a global benchmark for a center of government organization that can drive coordination across a very large and complicated government and organize around particular priorities and do accountability and communicate things quickly, like during a government shutdown or during a crisis like the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. OMB steps into motion and really provides substantive arms and legs, and also, when healthy, pushback to the White House to argue for outcomes that may be a little bit mid or longer term than winning the news cycle that night. And I worry that that to the extent that OMB is undervalued or chasing talent away or seen as quote unquote kind of deep staters that are trying to prevent the administration from being successful versus trying to ensure its success, but ensure its success balanced against, kind of legal limits or other evidence, learnings from history, different tensions that exist, that we take away this great thing that was launched and developed to be to make the White House as effective as it could be. So I worry because I'm not there. I don't have a good understanding in a way that and because of all the people that have left the IRS and who I've spoken to, who have given me a readout of some of the challenges they've seen with the impacts of this administration. I don't have as good a read on OMB, but I am concerned that hollowing out OMB's core role of not just helping the White House architect a priority, but helping them do it in a smart and kind of way that's curated to balance speed, accountability, and other requirements, some mid and longer term. I worry that we're losing something important.
Yeah, very, very well said. Good, you gave a good, for those listening, it was a great articulation of the mission statement of OMB. So I appreciate that a lot, having served there also. We have a couple of very good questions we got to get to here in these final few minutes.
Please.
Peter asks, basically, why doesn't the IRS make and supply their own electronic, the question everybody has, automated system, and maybe perhaps charge the taxpayers if they want to use it, as opposed to using some of the outside vendors? What's the story there?
It's an age-old question, Jim. And actually, you and I were at OMB when this whole thing started. And what happened was, and I'll try to quickly go through the history. Right at the start of the Bush administration, there was an electronic government explosion, and more forms were moving online. We were moving into digital signatures for the first time. Wet signatures were being replaced, and there was a lot of excitement, including at the IRS, to move forms into this space. But the IRS didn't move quick enough, and an industry emerged where vendors started putting out their version of tax forms online. And by the time the IRS was ready to go, industry was like, wait, we already have a tool, and if the IRS does it, then our product becomes moot. And so a compromise was reached where something called the Free File Alliance came about, where these companies would say, we will offer the tool for free on a means tested basis, But the government, you shouldn't offer the tool for free for everyone. And that's the deal that was struck, and that's the deal that existed for a long time until very recently. And what happened was there were complaints and concerns, not going to justify whether they were good complaints or bad complaints, but there were complaints about the free file solution being a viable enough one. And a lot of people like this questioner were like, well, why can't I just have the option on the menu? And so when I was there, we did for the first time produce a tool called Direct File, which allowed we piloted it in a number of states. It was not means tested, but it was for a simple filer, so you had to do the standard deduction, and if you took exotic deductions, you weren't eligible and whatnot. So it was for the more simple filer, only because we were deploying the tool for the first time. And it was a very successful launch, and it got really high customer service grades, and it really performed as well as the private sector solutions did. But it was politically a flashpoint. There were essentially right down party lines. The Republicans in Congress criticized this kind of government interference with what was a viable private sector marketplace. And the Democrats told me and the IRS to go, go, go. Like, you're not scaling this product quick enough. Interestingly, I was very curious as to what would happen to the direct file solution in the Trump administration. It's still not clear. The commissioner that took over from me, Billy Long, announced that direct file was dead, but the Treasury Department quickly walked that back. And so this tool may not be dead, even though now the Republicans are in charge. So it's very doable. That we proved that you could absolutely do it. It's just a question of will and resources. And so you would never think that a technology solution to file your taxes could be a political flashpoint, but it was. And that's because, like with anything, if they're seen as winners and losers, stakeholder entrenchment can slow things down. And for me, my attitude is, let's just make a decision. Either we're going to have the tool or not. And if we are, let's go all in and make it a great one. And if not, let's not do it. And let's have the IRS work on other things that can be helpful for taxpayers.
Very good. We are over time, but I'm going to abuse my authority here as as the moderator, and just you get 1 minute to do this one, which is a question from an AAI colleague, Kevin Kozar, who's an excellent student or scholar of American governance, and so he asks, Doge has kind of wandered around, done a bunch of different things. Would it be better? I mean, this is what I thought they were going to do. Would it be better just to have a group of IT private sector people helping the federal apparatus, a little bit like an OMB type office at the White House, focused on those big and complicated IT questions, and also the application of AI going forward? Would that be a better use of Doge's talents?
Yeah, it's just like where I started with, what do they put in the backpack first? Like, let's optimize their work towards where we really think government is broken. Like, I saw an interview on Fox News with Secretary Besson and the Doge lead at the IRS. It was a 9-minute interview talking about how broken the technology and the vendors, and I agreed with all of it. People were like calling me saying, "What do you think?" I was like, the biggest disappointment I had was the Doge guy said, "I'm going back to the private sector as soon as I can." I was like, oh, well, like, if you're gonna like be all in, be all in, and because these things take more than a few weeks or months to fix. And you're on to something with the way in which procurement and technology. And during that interview, they talked about how talented the IRS tech folks are, but that there was just the wrong incentive structure, the wrong procurement function, and the wrong environment to really advance technology in a smart and effective way. And I was like, yeah, amen to that. Let's figure out how to solve it. And so I think it's a really good idea, as you think about future Doge, to take some of the kind of ambition, speed, break glass mentality, but target it in where things are really much more broken. And then also, when doing it, there's got to be better checks and balances than we saw this time around.
Commissioner Werfel, Daniel Werfel, thank you so much for joining us today. You offered a a wide range of, I think, helpful insights into what it really is involved when you run these big agencies. So very much appreciate your time. That concludes our program for today. Thank you to the audience for joining us.
Thank you, Jim.